environment expert. Dr. Sabry, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Doctor, how do you see the importance of the launch of the Horus 2 satellite?
Yes.
Yes, the significance of the launch of the Horus 2 satellite, sir.
By the way, it was decided a few years ago to monitor the impacts of climate change and also the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere using satellites imaging, and they introduced what's called GECOS, Global Climate Observation System.
Yes.
And the developed countries, the United States and NASA, also launched a satellite to measure the consequences and impacts of the climate change, also the concentration of greenhouse gases and their effect on the interactions between these gases in the atmosphere.
Yes.
Egypt, I think, has launched this satellite, which is a very good and advanced step to share the international efforts to monitor the climate change through measuring the impacts of climate change and also the concentration of the greenhouse gases, particularly on the Arab area and on Egypt, focusing on Egypt.
Yes. Sir, how would the launch of the satellite impact the fight against the climate change in the African continent?
The satellite imaging regarding the climate change has, I think, a very assisting role.
Yes.
But by the way, there is a need also to integrate the satellite imaging with the terrestrial observation system and terrestrial stations, because we cannot depend only on the satellite imaging, but we have to integrate both the satellite imaging regarding the climate change and the terrestrial observation systems, which are very important, and they are spread on the ground in different countries.
Yes. Sir, how can the satellite act as a disaster monitoring tool as announced by the contributors to the project?
Technically, in fact, I don't know in depth how they work, but as far as I know, the images that have been taken by the satellite, they are analyzed through certain software and other applications in order to distinguish between the different species of the greenhouse gases, also to identify the impact, for example, of the climate change. If you have vegetation, if you have agricultural area or desert area or marine area, all these can be distinguished through the some applications and some advanced software to differentiate between the different impacts and also different areas, and also regarding the concentration of the greenhouse gases.
Yes. How would you list the repercussions of the climate change on Africa as a whole and on Egypt in particular, Doctor?
The impact of climate change on Africa is very, very severe, and it was expected that the African continent is the most vulnerable continent all over the world, and also, particularly also in Egypt, because Egypt will suffer additionally from the sea level rise, and the northern coast of Egypt, the Delta Nile, will be highly affected, in addition to the storms, the storms, and the extreme weather events that will affect the agricultural productivity, the water resources, in addition to the health of the people.
Yes. Officials say the Horus 2 will help meet the requirements of Egypt's 2030 vision for sustainable development. How would you elaborate on this statement, sir?
I think through having more accurate data and observations regarding the impacts of climate change on Egypt through the satellite, this will foster the observation system, the ground or the terrestrial observation system, and in such case we can have more reliable data, more reliable information on which we can put and we can enhance our interventions towards the adaptation with climate change, and also to have the more vulnerable areas in order to address these vulnerable areas.
Yes. Sir, Cairo and Beijing are reportedly together building the Horus series, with actually Beijing paying for the bulk of the program. How do you explain the Chinese interest in taking part in this program?
Please, can you repeat it again, the question?
Yes, sir. Cairo and Beijing are together building the Horus series, with Beijing paying for the bulk of the program. How do you explain the Chinese interest in taking part in this program?
I think the cooperation with the Chinese partners is very important because they have advanced technologies and they have experience in that issue, and the cooperation with Beijing is very important in order to benefit from their experience on satellite imaging and satellite technology in general. And I think they have already experienced this issue in China, and in such case we can benefit more with cooperation with the Chinese government.
Yeah. Actually, African countries reportedly need to ensure the availability of the sustainable investments required for developing the states to face the climate change repercussions. How would you elaborate on firms of sustainable investments, sir?
If we mean sustainable investment in Africa, I think Africa needs sustainable investment because Africa has Africa is rich in natural resources, but the problem is how to utilize these resources for the benefit of the African continent and the African peoples. That's why I think the African countries can benefit from the targeting the climate change through having a sustainable strategy, a sustainable plan to take the opportunity to benefit from this crisis of climate change, to have more sustainable solutions in the African countries through utilizing the renewable energy, the energy efficiency, and also going in depth in agriculture, sustainable agriculture in the African continent, and in addition to utilize the water resources or the natural resources in the African continent.
Why is Africa the most affected continent with the climate change?
Because the African countries, most of them are developing countries, poor countries, and their wealth have been taken by the developed countries, and they have no finance sufficient and also technology sufficient to address the climate change. And that's why the African continent, the African countries, asked always the developed countries to have their role, because they have already benefited from the wealth of the African continent and the resources, and they are historically the reason of the climate change, and now they have duty. They have to give to assist the African countries
Yeah.
with finance and technology transfer. This is not, benefit from them, but it is a duty of the developed countries towards the African countries.
Indeed. Dr. Said Sabry, our international environment expert, thank you so much for being our guest for today and for your precious input. And moving to Niger, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited on African tour that also took him to Ethiopia. The visit reportedly